Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. And joining us tonight are Mark Ogden, senior writer for ESPN, and Ian Ladyman, football editor at the Daily Mail. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run through the Back Pages ahead of another busy weekend of sport. This is the Times. Britannia rules the waves, but there's no Ratcliffe backing for Ten Hag, and Guardiola, our plea to delay next season was denied. The Mail has Sir Jim refuses to back Ten Hag, but the sailing going well's pictured there too. Peps pop at league over refusal to delay season. The Sun, FIFA laws illegal, transfer dreadline day, ruling to end player sales, and New City v Prem war. Front page of the Telegraph Sport, Ratcliffe fails to back Ten Hag. At least the sailing is going well. Jim, pictured there with Sir Ben Ainsley, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. In the Eye back page, United ready to rekindle Tuchel talks. And the Mirror has Manchester United on a similar theme. Manchester United boss on the brink, sack Eric, not my call. Again, the quotes from Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and transfer rules set for huge shake-up. And the Star has a cliffhanger as the headline. Ratcliffe, that is C-L-I-F-F-E. A plot twist in Old Trafford, soap opera. Sir Jim dodges questions about Ten Hag's future. OK, let's start with the Telegraph front page of the sports supplement. Then Ratcliffe fails to back Ten Hag. James Ducker, the Northern football correspondent, with the byline here. United's manager future is not my call, insists Ineos chief. Billionaire will be at Villa Park as Dutchman faces crucial test. And at least the sailing's going well, Jim. Ratcliffe smiling below. Ian, what did you make of this? Do you believe that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has nothing to do with Eric Ten Hag's future at Manchester United?
No, I absolutely don't believe it. I don't see why any Manchester United fan would believe it either. Why would someone like Jim Ratcliffe, with his history in business and in sport, put so much money into Manchester United, so much thought and effort into Manchester United, planning a new stadium, assembling a new executive team, and then just not have anything to do with the identity of the most important person in the building? I don't believe him for a minute. I also don't think that he's done himself or his manager or his football club any favours by stopping at a sailing event to talk about Manchester United. There's so much noise around that football club at the moment. Every game that Manchester United play at the moment feels like a huge event. They're on the back pages for the wrong reasons, enough at the moment. And why Sir Jim Ratcliffe should choose to put them there again and just throw this whole debate about Eric Ten Hag up in the air today, I don't really understand why he would do that.
OK, let's get to the Mirror back page. Man United boss on the brink. Sack Eric, not my call. Mark, what do you make of the comments from Ratcliffe and Eric Ten Hag's position as we speak this Friday night?
Yeah, I take Lado's point that, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has come in making a lot of noise and saying a lot of things and making a lot of appointments. And then to kind of almost pass off the responsibility for the manager's future doesn't really stack up. Maybe this is a bit of deft management, because I know he's going to be at the game on Sunday and he probably doesn't want the camera to pan to him every time that United make a mistake or concede a goal and, looking for a reaction. So he's probably trying to shift that emphasis away a little bit. But we do know that they've made some appointments in terms of senior management. They've got a new CEO, Omar Barada. Dan Ashworth came in the summer, director of football. So both those guys came in after Eric Ten Hag was retained as manager by Sir Jim Ratcliffe at the end of the day. But I suppose those guys are in place to make the decision. But ultimately, he's been a little bit disingenuous, Jim Ratcliffe, because he is on the three-man football board at United, which make all the football decisions, which is him, Joe Glazer and Dave Brailsford. So he has a say. Of course he does. Somebody has to make a decision. And the question to ask Sir Jim Ratcliffe up to date, if you're not making the decision, who is? Who is actually having the final say on the future of the manager? Because he did say, in other words, it's not working. He said that they want to get United back to where they used to be, but it's clearly not there right now. And it isn't. They were all over the place in Porto last night, and they were very lucky to get away with the draw. They were hammered at the weekend against Tottenham, and they go to Aston Villa with a similar problem. And obviously, the manager is facing calls about his future now. I think that, well, I know that United don't want to get rid of him. They are desperate for him to succeed because financially, it's difficult to get rid of Ten Hag right now. United are really up to the limit on PSR. They had announced losses of £130 million last month, but they still somehow managed to comply with PSR. But they can't keep throwing money away, and sacking a manager, bringing a new manager in, even if he's a manager that's not in a job, is going to cost money. So they really, really want it to work. But I think if they lose badly at Aston Villa on Sunday, it'll be the end for Ten Hag.
Okay, well, that's your take on it, Mark. Let's get more from Ian with the help of his paper as well. The back page, Nathan Salt and Tom Colomossi with the story. Sir Jim refuses to back Ten Hag. Ratcliffe ducks the question as pressure piles up on United boss. Do you think Sunday could be decisive for Ten Hag as well, Ian? What's your take?
I absolutely do, because Mark touched on the financial situation at Manchester United just then, and what they cannot afford to do, literally cannot afford to do again this season, is to miss out on the top four, to miss out on the Champions League again. The disparity in earnings and revenue between the Champions League and the Europa League and the other minor European competitions is absolutely enormous. United are having to wear that already this season. They literally cannot afford to wear that again. If United lose and lose heavily, or if they just lose on Sunday and find themselves 9 points or more adrift of the Champions League places already, then Manchester United, Jim Ratcliffe, Dave Brailsford, Owen Barada, all the people that Mark just mentioned, are going to have to make a decision, because otherwise they will just drift. And they sort of fundamentally have to ask themselves, do they think that Erik Ten Hag is the man to take Manchester United to back to the top of the Premier League? Have they seen any evidence since they've been there and previously that he is taking the team in the right direction? And I'm afraid, much as those of us who've dealt with Ten Hag over the last 2 or 3 years find him a decent bloke, an honourable bloke, quite a strong bloke in some of the decisions he's made over Cristiano Ronaldo and Jadon Sancho, there's not enough evidence to substantiate any kind of claim or belief that he's going to take them where they need to be. So if they aren't going to do something next week, then I'd love to know what their plan is, because at the moment there does not seem to be one.
No, it feels an uncomfortable comparison as well with Unai Emery and Aston Villa, doesn't it? He's actually been in the job less time than Erik Ten Hag has at Manchester United. Let's get Jamie Carragher's take in the Telegraph, as Sky Sports analyst as well, of course. So Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos fudged their first big decision and has already cost Manchester United £200 million. What do you make of Carragher's assessment of the position, Mark? Is it a cogent point, or is it after timing from Jamie?
No, I think he's right, but I also know what United's justification for it is, in the sense that they didn't want to make such a big, decisive appointment or change in the summer without their key men, Barada and Dan Ashworth, at the club. So when United won the FA Cup, both those people hadn't been appointed. They'd been appointed, but they hadn't arrived. They were serving gardening leave, so they didn't want to change the manager and bring a new guy in without actually having the people that they've employed to make those big decisions in the club. That is the official reason, but I think the unofficial reason is that they basically bottled it. They didn't want to sack a manager and almost have him become a martyr to the fans, because the fans wanted him to stay. And had they sacked Erik Ten Hag after the FA Cup, he would always have been the guy that won the FA Cup and left as a winner. Whether he was a winner or not is debatable, because United finished 8th last season with a negative goal difference, so it depends which side of the coin you're on. But ultimately, they did mess it up, because they were speaking to other managers before the FA Cup final. They were looking to appoint somebody else, and they decided that it was easier from a PR point of view to keep Erik Ten Hag. Look, we know that Gareth Southgate would have been high on the list had he been available, but he wasn't until the middle of the summer. Thomas Tuchel, Mauricio Pochettino, Kieran McKenna, Roberto De Zerbi, they were all in the frame, but for whatever reason, each one of them was overlooked, and they ended up with Ten Hag, and I think it was a mistake. And I think they're paying for that mistake now. And I think ultimately, clubs that have a new regime pretty quickly change the manager. I think that will happen with Ten Hag either next week or pretty soon afterwards.
Well, Mark, you mentioned the Tuchel connection from the summer, and the only paper to really take it a step further in terms of the debate over the Manchester United manager, say United ready to rekindle Tuchel talks. Ian, in your opinion, how good a fit would that be, and how likely would Tuchel be to come at this stage of United's, I guess, progression, development, transformation, whatever you want to call it?
Well, I think the admiration for Gareth Southgate is real. I'll say that's the first thing I'll say. I think that's very, very real. He's obviously available. Tuchel, another one who's considered in the summer. I think he's a very, very good manager. I think he did a very, very good job at Chelsea, actually. And I think he probably would have done a decent job at Bayern Munich had he not fallen out with them. I think that is one of the things that United might look at when they look at Tuchel, is the manner of his departure from his last two posts, and whether his personality is a fit for the football club. He's certainly a manager who would want a lot of control. Does that fit with the way that football club is now set up? I'm not sure. But he is, if they want somebody to, if they want a coach, because he is a coach, and that is one of the accusations I've levelled at Ten Hag for a long time now about his United team, is that they don't look coached. I think they're coached well enough. And I think a very, very good coach would improve that team immediately to a certain level. But there is one thing that I will say: all this talk about manager and talk about Ten Hag, of course he is the focus. I tell you what really needs to work at Manchester United over the next few months. Those 5 players that they bought in the summer, they have got to work. It's actually easier to replace a manager than it is to rebuild the squad. And the players like De Ligt and Ugarte and Xerxes and Diarra and Mazraoui, if they don't work over the course of this season, or 3 of them don't work, or 4 of them, then they've got a real problem. A problem that could be much deeper than the identity of the manager, because you can't keep rebuilding squads. Those players need time. I wouldn't say at the moment that any of them have exactly impressed anybody thus far, but we are only 6 games into a season. We don't need to write those players off yet. But those signings that were made on the watch of people like Dan Ashworth and Jason Wilcox, they are as fundamental to what happens next for Manchester United, as is the future of Erik Ten Hag.
Good point. A lot of money spent, and De Ligt in particular, a very difficult Thursday night in Porto. Interesting to see if he starts or not against Aston Villa. Some may say Harry Maguire will get the nod. What's your take on Tuchel, Mark? Is he as close to a quick fix as you get in international football? And would the hierarchy have to swallow some authority or concede some power if he is to come in?
I think yes to all those questions, but I think with Thomas Tuchel, I think he will be the perfect fit, because what United need is a manager with charisma and presence, and somebody that can shoulder the pressure of managing that club, and he has that. Whether he's the guy that the owners and the management team want, that is debatable, because one thing about Thomas Tuchel is he's a very good coach, but he's not very good at managing upwards, and you have to manage upwards nowadays in terms of football clubs. And when United spoke to him in the summer, it wasn't a one-way street in the sense that United decided it wasn't for them. I was also told that it was a sense of Tuchel not being convinced by the structure that sold to him as well. He'd had that at Chelsea, and it didn't really work. So, but I think, if you want somebody with a track record and a big personality who's used to managing big clubs, then Thomas Tuchel ticks the box. Gareth Southgate doesn't in that respect. He hasn't got the same, pedigree in the club game. I think Graham Potter's been mentioned as well, because he's out of work, and he did his little audition on Monday Night Football this week. But I don't think he has the personality or the track record either. So the perfect candidate is Thomas Tuchel, but is imperfect as well, because he can't manage upwards very well. So it's a tough decision. There isn't a perfect candidate out there for United in the sense that ticks every box.
No, we'll keep across the Manchester United story over the weekend. Unai Emery, of course, pointing out that Ten Hag's got a very good record against him in club football, which I thought was very generous. Gentlemen, thank you for now. We'll take a quick break, and coming up after that break, we'll talk about Manchester United no more. We're going to switch our attention to this in the sun, including what could be a hugely significant story, the transfer deadline day ruling to end player sales. We'll discuss whether that is going to be the case. Welcome back. You are watching Back Pages tonight, and it's welcome back to Mark Ogden, senior writer for ESPN, and Ian Ladyman, football editor at the Daily Mail. Let's go to the Sun. Ian, I'll come to you first with that big back page splash we saw before the break. Transfer deadline day. Football's transfer system could be ripped up after a landmark legal victory for former Premier League ace Lassana Diarra. This story by Martin Lipton. Ian, what has happened, and do you agree it could be foundational to football? I suppose the line of writing here is that they could become like conventional employees who can come and go as they want.
Yeah, to try and sum it up briefly, the story here is about Lassana Diarra and his. He fell out with his club, Lokomotiv Moscow, in Russia 10 years ago. Contract was essentially torn up. He then wanted to move to Charleroi in Belgium. and thought he would be able to do so because he no longer had a contract. And under the current system, FIFA's current system, Sharwa would have been and were liable to pay compensation, and that scuppered the transfer. Diarra's taken this to court, and the ruling now that has been made today in the European Court is that small technicality in FIFA's transfer system has been deemed not to be right and proper and legal. So it is important because it further impinges on the sanctity of a player's contract. It further moves some of the power in our game away from the football clubs towards players. You could argue they've probably got too much already. However, if you were to ask me, do I think this will blow the whole transfer system up in the air? Do I think that players will essentially be able to walk away from clubs willy-nilly when they want to, and the whole concept of transfer fees will disappear? No, I absolutely do not think that will happen. However, what this will do is it will give players reason to think when they are in disputes with clubs, when they are unhappy at clubs. It will open the door to the system being abused. A player will now know or think that if he or she starts to cause a bit of an issue at a club or starts to make themselves unpopular or hard to handle and maybe leave a situation tenable, so they've got to be released, then they might do that on purpose to try and get out, knowing that they can then move to another club without a transfer fee having to be paid. So I think there is a problem. I think it is an issue. I think it will have to be addressed. I noticed that the players' unions are already on top of it. FIFA are trying to play it down. I wouldn't play it down. However, I don't think in 10 years we'll be sitting here looking at a completely different landscape in terms of the way players move from club to club. I just don't think that will happen.
Very early in terms of trying to see how it will pan out, but interesting that lawyer Jean-Louis Dupont, who was involved in the Jean-Marc Bosman case, a landmark case for football transfers in 1995, was a part of this. Mark, what's your assessment of the case and what it might mean for transfers? Because the argument being, I suppose, that if contracts are diminished in terms of significance, then the idea of a fee becomes almost redundant if you follow it to its kind of, I guess, extreme conclusion.
Yeah, that's right. I'm with Ian on this. I do think that it will have a difference, and it won't be seismic in terms of what happens. Will it kind of kill the transfer market? I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's more a case of maybe at the top end of the game, players will have shorter contracts to avoid clubs being at risk of this happening. I mean, a club like Chelsea with so many long, 8-9 year contracts, that could be something that they'd be worried about. And we don't know the implications of Brexit. It's an EU ruling, so would it affect the Premier League clubs? I guess it would if they're competing in UEFA competitions, but not so if the clubs aren't. So there's a lot of questions to ask about this right now. We haven't really got the answers at the moment.
No, we haven't. We'll wait to see it all pan out as well. It's a good point that Chelsea may well have gone early with those long contracts. Ian, let's come to your back page in the Mail. Peps pop at league over refusal to delay season. What is Pep complaining about? Just give us a bit of context you did in our pre-show meeting as well about whether there has actually been an official request here.
Yeah, there's a line in that piece that I think has been written by Jack Gorn, our Manchester City correspondent, saying that there hasn't actually been a formal approach from City to the Premier League to delay their involvement at the start of next season. But the background to it is that City will be in this newly expanded 32-team Club World Cup that will take place across a month in America next summer. It'll be them in Chelsea, and Pep clearly wants or thinks that City should be able to start their Premier League season later because they won't have enough opportunity to get some rest after that tournament, presuming they get to the latter stages, which I would imagine they would. My take on it, it's another example of big football clubs trying to push at the margins of our game, trying to mould the shape of our game to suit them rather than to suit the game itself. I would argue that if City weren't playing in the Club World Cup next summer, they would be on a very long and relatively arduous pre-season tour. It's not a World Cup or European Championship summer next summer, so all the big name players will be on that tour. They'd be playing games anyway. And the other point is that City don't have to play in the Club World Cup if they don't want to. It's up to them what they prioritise. And if they decide to prioritise at this time when there is so much talk, much of it disingenuous, by the way, and self-serving, but there's so much talk about player welfare and schedules and players playing too much football. If City and others, because it won't just be City, any of our clubs invited to play in that tournament would go and play in it. But if they want to go and play in it, therefore, something's got to give. And if that means that they're going to start the next domestic season tired, overworked, overstretched, I would suggest that that is their problem and not a problem that the rest of the Premier League should be asked to accommodate.
What do you think, Mark? Any sympathy for Manchester City?
Not really, no. But we saw that Man United pulled out the FA Cup in 2000 and they still get stick for that now, 25 years later. So that is the issue that City face. But, I guess it's one of those situations that people have to factor in the reality of it, that there's a World Cup at the end of next season. So you can't expect the Premier League to give City extra 2 or 3 weeks to start the season, because you'd run into the Champions League final the following May, you'd run into the World Cup. It's just not feasible. There are too many games, too many competitions. Man City are in them because they're winning things. So, unfortunately, that's the price of success.
Yeah, and some strident comments from Pep Guardiola suggesting he will not be told what constitutes a strong team in the Club World Cup as well.